So, all right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody. We're so glad to have you with us right before your Thanksgiving break. Hopefully, you guys are starting or ending the week strong, excited to go into a break. I'm sure you're all ready for that. So we're excited to give you some ideas, some things to think about, mull over through break, and then hopefully implement in your SmartLab HQ program. For those of you who may not know me yet, I'm Haley Ruman. I'm the Professional Development Manager here at Creative Learning Systems. So I work with our trainers, develop new PD, help implement PD as well, and add facilitator resources to the Launchpad. So if there's anything you guys ever need in terms of PD or even resources you'd like, always feel free to reach out to me and I'll kind of add it to the little facilitator wish list I always have going. I also have Lauren Mischke with me. Hopefully, Lauren, I'm saying your last name right. Correct me if I'm not, but she is joining us. Lauren, do you want to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your background? She might have students or bells are ringing in the background. Oh, there she is.
There we go. Thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Lauren Mischke, and I am a STEM facilitator in Rawlins, Wyoming. I facilitate kindergarten through 5th grade. This is my 4th year, and like any time in teaching, it has changed every year. So I absolutely love these PDs that we can jump on in our leisure, and I look forward to learning with you.
Thanks, Lauren. All right, so in this webinar, I put a little poll in our Facebook facilitator group last week just to make sure we're covering some topics that are going to be helpful for you. And some of the themes that came up were collaboration, classroom management, and how to set that up for primary learners, as well as just ideas for documenting with primary. Because a lot of them are not independently reading or writing to the same degree as upper elementary. Of course, that's a little bit unique. So we're going to be going through collaboration and talking about the 5 principles of productive group work, interpersonal skills, and how you can support that with your primary learners, as well as talking about how you can do it through literacy. So I've got some ReadAlouds to share with you guys. We'll then move into classroom management and talk about some routines and roles that are going to help your students succeed in this more student-led environment, but at a degree that's appropriate for them. We're also going to talk about routines, protocols, and resources that you can use for encouraging reflection and sharing with your primary learners. Different ways you might do that, different platforms you might use, and we'll talk about all those. Just a reminder for everyone, if you guys have questions or comments or ideas, please use the chat feature. I'll be keeping an eye on that and trying to answer your questions as we go. So feel free to add those in and we can kind of stop and answer those throughout. If you've got a more complex kind of question and it's just easier to talk, just throw it in the chat and I can kind of give you permission to use your microphone and just explain. So feel free to use that avenue as well. All right, so we are going to talk about collaboration and how you can encourage that in your SmartLab. Some of you actually have this book that I pulled some of these ideas and principles from. It's called Productive Group Work, How to Engage Students, Build Teamwork, and Promote Understanding. If you have this in your SmartLab, it's probably in your locking cabinet with a stack of books about project-based learning, essential questions, a bunch of different, I think probably 5 or 6 different books in your set. So you may have this if your lab was installed, 10 years ago, you may not, but if you ever want to buy it, we have copies that you could buy. So in this book, they talk about the 5 principles of productive group work, and that's positive interdependence, face-to-face interaction, individual and group accountability, interpersonal and small group skills, and group processing. If you are kind of implementing and supporting those, it'll lead to productive group work. So I'm going to talk a little bit about each one, as well as just some strategies you can kind of incorporate for some of those, and how some of those are already embedded in our SmartLab programs. And Lauren, feel free to jump in whenever you want to add something. So starting with positive interdependence, the idea here is really that through however you structure the environment or the activities, students are required and need each other in order to be successful. So some ways that is just with, goal setting and the scope of your goal. Of course, what you can do alone is typically smaller than what you can do with multiple people. So keeping that in mind, the resources, some of the ideas they have, they mentioned in the book are like allowing each student to be an expert at kind of different topics or pieces. In a traditional classroom, that might look like, doing a project on Google Maps, and one student is experienced with, the food and the lodging in that culture. They're learning about that culture. And another student is more experienced with like landmarks and history. And then they, use their information collectively to be successful with their project. In the SmartLab, that might look a little bit different. Some of your projects are going to lend themselves a little bit easier to that, like Code and Go Colby. You might have one student who is really great at the coding cards and able to, put that sequence together, and another who maybe becomes an expert on the robot. And then when they switch, they can help each other and they both contribute, to a common goal. You can also do this with roles, having students contribute a little bit differently, like having one student build while the other documents, and then they switch. And so they're each contributing different pieces to that project, but they're both essential to the success of that. With face-to-face interaction, the idea here is really that they're more than just discussing how to divide and conquer, but they're talking about next steps, they're problem solving together, they're sharing what they learned and clarifying with each other. And the great thing about the SmartLab HQ is that that is already built in. They're doing that every day. So that one is kind of an easy one to cover. With individual and group accountability, you just want to make sure that you're recognizing and kind of looking for contributions from the individual as well as, as a group. So that might look like a group grade, but then also some individual accountability. How did you collaborate with your partner? Doing some one-on-one self-assessment. You can also, in like documentation, when they're either drawing or adding labels to their pictures or adding sentences, if they're at that point, in their writing development, having them do it in different colors or using symbols to mark what each one contributed. That way, if you have questions, you can always go back to the person who wrote it and talk about that with them and their partner, or just as well, so who is contributing what, and they can monitor a little bit themselves, that it's somewhat equal. So that might just be a quick reflection. Look at your documentation sheet. What color, is it even? Does one person maybe need to add some more ideas? That can be a good little monitoring tool. And then also, find opportunities to have your students provide feedback to their partners. I definitely recommend using sentence stems for that, since that may not be a skill that they are familiar with yet. Like one thing that you did, if I was talking to my partner, that helped us be successful is blank. And one thing that you could do next time to help us be even more successful is blank. And just giving them that framework to help them frame it in a positive and constructive way. You also might, I read a suggestion about kind of conferring with students before they share with each other, or conferring as they share, so that you can help them process that information and make sure it stays a constructive conversation. And that's something that maybe you pull into kind of a station rotation and have them come meet with you for a couple minutes just to debrief real quick, maybe every quarter, every semester, something periodic like that. Interpersonal and small group skills we're really going to dive into next. But some of these big skills are just being able to resolve conflicts. As you guys know, especially after a year and a half out of in-person learning, our students are really lacking some of these essential skills. And so there's going to need to be just some explicit instruction and focus and work around these. So working on resolving conflicts, communicating effectively, understanding each other's strengths. That's definitely one that you could pull in upper elementary and start to introduce in K-1, 2. focusing on the goal of the project, organizing each other to reach that goal. What are our roles? What are our tasks that we need to do? Do we need to divide and conquer just for efficiency and time's sake? I definitely recommend, again, providing sentence stems to help with a lot of these skills, like asking for help. Another big skill too is like, how do you graciously accept help and decline help? So we're going to talk a little bit about that, and I've got some sentence stems that you guys can use. Group processing is kind of the last one of the 5, and that's just reflection. How did the group work go? What worked? What didn't? How can we set goals to improve that next time, or what changes do we need to make to improve that next time? You could definitely pull in a rubric or just a simple kind of glow and grow, and build that into your routine. If you can spend 10 minutes at the end of every project, or maybe every couple weeks, and have some time to do some reflection, that can be really, really powerful. And a lot of these topics, you can introduce in a variety of ways. I'm going to talk a little bit about how you might integrate that into different parts of, your week, your lesson, and in some different formats. All right, so we are going to jump into interpersonal skills. 6 of the big ones that are specifically noted in this productive group workbook are leadership, decision-making, trust building, turn-taking, active listening, and conflict management. And as you guys know, and probably see in your SmartLabs all the time, these are really, really big skills and can really help make their projects just run more smoothly, but also have bigger outcomes because they're able to be efficient and productive in their groups. So leadership, I just want to talk a little bit. One of the pieces of that I think is really attainable for, kindergarten through 2nd grade learners is helping their team focus on the goal. So that might be as simple as reminding them at the beginning of the class period, okay, what are we going to do next? Or if their partner gets off track, hey, remember, our goal is to do this today. What should we do next? So kind of pulling each other back to get back on track. So that's one that you could definitely incorporate. We're going to talk about the next 5 in detail, and some resources and just strategies, tips for how to support those in your SmartLab. All right, so for decision-making, when it comes to decision-making, this looks like listening to others' ideas before making a decision, and also analyzing a decision and what are the pros and cons. In kindergarten, that might be really simple, like we have enough materials to do that idea, or we don't have enough materials. Could be very simple like that. I've got some sentence stems and some questions there that might help your students with prompting some of this. So this could be on an anchor chart. It could be on a bookmark. What do you think we should do? That's something that a partner could ask another partner to show that they are considering their partner's ideas before just moving forward. So that's something that you could build into a mini lesson, ask your students to try it out when they're working, and encourage them to use some of these questions and stems throughout their projects. A couple of suggestions. I recommend having some routines or strategies for compromising. Decision-making can be really challenging if your students don't agree and don't have strategies for, how to come to some kind of agreement. So later I'm going to talk about a specific 3 strategies that you can use. But this might be something that is important to have on an anchor chart, on a bookmark, somewhere accessible so that if students need a visual reminder of a strategy they can use, you've got it. Also, sometimes just giving students time, if possible, to test both ideas and then compare can be a really great part kind of the engineering design process, testing multiple ideas and comparing which one is best. With trust building, this is a really important part of teamwork and kind of the social emotional learning side. This looks like some I can statements, I can do what I say I'm going to do. So following through is really important for building trust. I can disagree or decline help respectfully. That's going to just create a positive atmosphere, between the partners. And I can give and receive helpful feedback. You could also introduce the word constructive as well, but helpful might be a little more accessible to some of your younger learners. So I've got some sentence stems there like, thank you for offering to help. Right now, I want to keep trying this, but I'll try that next, or I'll keep that in mind if I need another idea, or just offering to help. I have an idea. Would you like to hear it? And if they say no, that's okay. You can use a suggestion for, how to do some of this, especially feedback is a 3-step process for giving feedback. When I first saw this, I thought it was like a compliment sandwich, which, as we all know, is kind of transparent. But I really like this one because it starts with giving some strengths. What went really well? What can you praise your partner on or praise another group on, and use specific examples to demonstrate that. Second is providing constructive feedback. I think this part could be stronger, or more labels would help make it easier to understand. Giving specific feedback in a positive way, and they might need some sentence stems to help them with this, which you can use. And then ending with a clear next step. So like, great, I am going to work on adding labels to my picture. So it's not just talking, but it ends with some action. And then just one other tip, when students disagree, focus on the idea or the problem and not the person. Like, I don't disagree with you as a person. I just, this idea. I think something differently, or I'm thinking from a different perspective. So helping students to verbalize it in that way. With turn taking, especially with our students, our younger students, kindergarten and first grade, who haven't had a lot of experience in a formal school environment yet, this can be really helpful. This goes with, talking, being able to wait until someone else is done before starting to talk or share ideas, waiting patiently with physical materials. And I added in there, being able to help their partner while they're waiting. It doesn't mean you just sit and watch, but how can you participate with ideas, or with helping to give directions, or just talking about what's happening. So making sure they're actively engaged even while they're patiently waiting for their turn. So again, some sentence stems there, but a few suggestions. Use a timer to help them transitioning from, taking turns. So maybe at the beginning you scaffold with every 5 minutes, they take turns with, the mouse on the computer, or, holding Colby versus doing the coding cards. And I always recommend giving a warning beforehand, like in 1 minute, you're going to take turns. It also can be helpful to use some kind of cue to transition. If it's verbal, it might be like, asking whoever is giving up something, like, okay, now it's your turn. So I'm going to use a phrase to indicate that we're transitioning, and prompting your students to do that. You could also do a high five, like kind of a physical transition, or use some kind of cards, or even I know people have used like solo cups to indicate changes. So maybe on your board, you have colored cards, and you've got partner A and partner B, and it's green if it's their turn, and it's red if it's the other. You change them to yellow when you're getting ready to transition. And then, there's a lot of different ways you could implement that. Lauren, did you have an idea for turn taking?
Yeah, I think especially with the littles, utilizing movement as much as possible, and along the lines of taking responsibility for roles I have a conversation with my kiddos and they physically move around the room, and they know if it's not their turn, then they have the opportunity to be an expert and go and help others. So that kind of helps the chaos, I guess.
Yeah, and I think it's so important to keep everyone engaged all the time, whether it's helping their partner, helping another peer, doing a different part of the project. And that always helps with classroom management too. So you don't have students who don't know what they're doing. So definitely. All right. Active listening is another one, and this is really important for that communication piece, as well as when you're reflecting and sharing. I can show others with my body by making eye contact and facing my body towards them. I like the way this one is phrased because, you can listen and be faced, turn the other way, but the person who is speaking doesn't know that you're listening, and it's important for them to know that you are. So that's one way that we can show them we're listening. And then I can make sure I understand whoever is speaking by repeating what they said and asking related questions. Related is the big piece, especially for our younger learners who sometimes love sharing kind of sidebar comments. It's helpful to keep them on track with, is this a related thought, or is this something that we can share later, maybe during, group work time? So there are some sentence stems there to, help you get started with that, prompt some of their thinking and explanation as they're, talking to each other. There's also a protocol in there. So it's the pair communication active listening exercise. And that can be something just to give your students a little structure, especially if this is a skill that they're struggling with or new to. Start with that structure, and then you can slowly pull it back. Maybe give them larger chunks of time to accomplish 1 or 2 steps of that protocol. And then eventually you might be able to pull it back altogether and just remind them of kind of the phase or the progression of that protocol. So definitely check that out. Just as a reminder, I will be putting these slides up on the Launchpad and the facilitator resources. So if there's any things that you wanted to, copy and paste, that you wanted to transform into another resource or a link you wanted to use, you'll have access to this. I also know some of the text is a little small just because we're trying to fit a lot on the slide. So you can always blow it up and look at it large from that resource. The last section is conflict management, and that looks like being able to use I statements to explain how a student feels. That might be really a common practice already in your school, or if you have a slightly different approach, part of your PBIS program or just your behavior management program in your school or in your space, go ahead and use that so you can modify it. And then just also like being able to work with a partner to resolve a problem. That's kind of the basics of a lot of conflicts that come up. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about some compromising strategies, what they do if they don't agree. There's some sentence stems there for how they can address some of those situations. But the big strategies you can try, they're called the big 3. I linked the resource there, but this is really great if students can't agree. One strategy is just to let the other partner do their idea first and say, I'll do my idea next. Can we agree on that approach? And then another option is to mix the ideas together. So if one student really wanted to build a house and the other student wanted to build a pool, well, can we build a house with a pool? Can we put both of those together and see and connect them? Or create a brand new idea together? Continue to brainstorm, maybe talk about what they have in common or what they both like, and then choose an idea based on something they have in common. If they both love this one movie, maybe let's try and recreate that character. Just finding that common ground in order to come up with a new idea. Lauren, any strategies that you wanted to add around, conflict management and any situations you've had in your SmartLab where they disagree?
I think a lot of what I work on with this can kind of be applied to the expectations. And I like to try and sit down at the beginning of the year and do a mini lesson with them where they come up with some of those. And then I've got my targeted points like these 5 you've talked about, and it becomes their idea and their buy-in is great. And we create it on a Padlet and then we pull that up and have it displayed as they come and rotate through every year. So it's just about making them feel like they came up with the ideas.
Yeah, definitely. I love like living anchor charts, whether it's digital or physical, something that they can add ideas to, especially if it's physical, having them go up and write if it's appropriate, or maybe just add a little drawing to represent that was their idea. That's something that you could grow, across the whole year. What are some new ideas we found for, how to settle a disagreement? Maybe they add rock, paper, scissors, and that's what works for them. So I love that idea. All right. Couple different ways you can integrate these skills and really like the support and development of these skills into your program. Consider having a monthly theme. Maybe it is communication or conflict management, conflict resolution. You might come up with a more fun term for that, but focus that whole month on building that skill set. What does that look like? Maybe each week or each class period has a slightly different theme. Like here's one aspect of conflict management we're going to talk about, some sentence stems you can use, some strategies you can use. Now try it as you're working. And maybe your debrief becomes a time to reflect on that. And then throughout the year, cover all the topics that you want to. I'm sure you will have more than you can cover, but that's a good way just to start introducing that. And you can always introduce it at kind of developmentally appropriate levels for each grade that expand on each other each time. Because this is a non-traditional learning space, you may not have as much of a mini lesson as you might normally would in a traditional classroom. So pulling this in as kind of a mini lesson to launch your class period and to kind of frame some of the work that they're going to be doing for the rest of the period. So that's another way. Also pull it into some of your discussions. If you use morning meetings throughout your, if that's just part of the culture in your school, that you always start with the morning meeting, maybe it starts with discussions around that, sharing some ideas or tips or even experiences related to the skills you're trying to build. You can also build it into self-assessments and reflections. We're going to be working on some primary specific rubrics soon, so keep an eye out for some of those that might help you with these skills and other skills that primary learners will be building in the SmartLab. And then ReadAlouds, which might go with your monthly theme and your mini lesson. But ReadAlouds is a great opportunity to bring literacy in, as well as just, primary students. I think most elementary students love ReadAlouds. So that can be a great way to pull it in. All right, so I'm going to share some ReadAlouds that I have here. And how you can use these to build some of these skills. So the first one is, what if everybody did that? If you haven't read this book yet, it is super cute. It's all about this boy who does what you might call like negative actions, like throwing a can or, a carton of juice on the ground instead of throwing it away. And it always poses the question, like, what if everybody did that? And then on the other side of the page, it shows kind of the consequences, like, wow, there'd be trash everywhere piled up. And then at the end of the book, this boy does something positive, like he hugs his mom and it says, what if everybody did that? And just gets them to realize, the power of the individual, but also the group in contributing to, positive outcomes. So I've got some discussion prompts there specifically related to different pages in the book. I'm not going to go through each of them. If you have this book or choose to get this book from your library, just check out this resource and there's some prompts there. A fun activity you could do with this one is use a program like Pixie or Comic Life or a stop motion app, and have them create their own scenario related to the SmartLab. What would happen if everybody did this? And they might have a picture of them, maybe like banging on their keyboard. And then also having a picture of like, what would a pile of broken keyboards look like? Or maybe if we were all sad at our computers because our keyboards were broken. And then the last part, having them create a positive. What would happen if everybody, maybe it's like using their keyboards gently or cleaning them up, and what would the impact of that be? So that could be a nice beginning of the year or even relaunch when you come back from winter break of how do we treat equipment properly, and just how do we contribute to a productive and safe and clean and sustainable, smart lab. So this one I highly recommend. Oh, and I also want to just note that this is also a really great entry point into rules, because it does, and talks like we say, don't litter. So what is the purpose of that? Why is that kind of rule in place? What are the outcomes if we don't follow that rule? So that could be a good entry point into kind of norms, expectations for the Smart Lab. The next book is Louise and Andy, The Art of Friendship. In this book, a young artist moves in next door to another artist, and they are like so excited. They're living next to each other. They both love art. So they start creating art together. And then one of Andy tries to fix Louise's art, and it ends up ripping in half. And it causes, this big dramatic separation between the two friends. Louise ends up turning it into a piece of art, a new piece of art that actually incorporates like both of their artistic styles. And then they decide to go forward, like creating art together. So this can be, a really great way to talk about collaboration, but also like, what if we have different ideas? How do we offer help, and how do we decline help if we don't want it? So one activity that you could do with this book is have them actually practice offering, accepting, and declining help, and what that sounds like, and use some of the sentence stems to help with that. Another book that kind of fits along the same topic is called Garcia and Colette Go Exploring, where they want different things out of their exploration. So they go explore by themselves and realize how lonely it is. And then they come back together and figure out a place that they can explore that has both of the things that they want. So that can also be another entry point into compromise, but also like, what do we do if we disagree, and the value of working together versus being alone. The next book is called When Pencil Meets Eraser, or Met Eraser. And I really like this one. I think it's super cute. In this book, like Pencil is, drawing his own illustration, super happy about it. I don't need anybody else's help. An eraser comes along and sees opportunities to improve the illustrations by erasing some of Pencil's work. Like, for example, Pencil draws a meadow, and Eraser is like, look, I can create a path by erasing. Pencil's not super happy about it, but then eventually realizes the benefits of having an eraser. And then they decide to work together to create even better art. This is a really great one for talking about the strengths of each other and recognizing the strengths and how collectively we can do more or better when we work together versus on our own. It can also be another good way to discuss like working on each other's work, and how to ask permission before changing something that your partner or another group did. An activity you could do with this one is have them practice compromising as they draw a picture together. Using, they can use Pixie, Animation-ish, just paper if you want as well, any other tools that you have, and then try some of those strategies. So maybe you have them develop an idea by themselves and then come together and they've got to create a piece of art together. And maybe they first draw on Pixie one person, then the other, or maybe they blend the ideas or they come up with something new. So have them practice those explicitly so they have some experience of what that sounds like, what that looks like. And then the last book is called Rexbrexit. And we have probably all seen some examples of this. Three friends are building structures, and then Rex always comes over and like wrecks it, kicks it all apart. They get really upset, but then they decide to try to build with Rex and include him in their process. And they build this gigantic, awesome structure, and then they wreck it together. So it's a great way, to talk about including each other, and how to understand if someone's doing something that you don't like, how can we include them so that they are part of the group, and just understanding, how people might feel and think. Those are a lot of the discussion prompts in here, thinking about how each character thinks and how some of the actions of others make them feel. There is a really great, I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but an SEL program that really talks about and focuses on how our actions make other people think and feel about us. And I think that can be a really empowering process for students to think about, but also, to change some of their actions so they better understand, like, wow, why is this person getting really upset with me? Well, maybe it's because I did something that I didn't realize upset them, but I might stop and think about it next time. So you might have them act out some scenarios, maybe give them a prompt and have them try it out, and practice how to pull someone into the group or how to redirect them to help, instead of maybe work against them. There's another book that is similar to this. It's called Ta-Da. I don't know if you guys have seen this before. In this book, these two children are kind of writing their own fairy tale. And then this boy always comes in and tries to like ruin it. Like he's got a dragon who comes and like burns everything. And then she's always trying to like save it. She might come up with, use her wand to have a bucket of water fall on it and put out the fire. And eventually they realize that instead of working against each other, they can work together to write an even better story, and have fun together. So this is another great example of how to work with each other instead of against or in parallel to each other. All right. Lauren, did you want to add
Yes, I have one more book I would love to share. It is called Coding to Kindness by Valerie Souza, and I just pulled up the Amazon link so I can post that in the chat. Awesome. But it's focused on Grace, Dorothy, and Ada, pioneer women in STEM, and it focuses on treating others kindly as they code using sequence and directional cards. I use it as an introduction, and then I've used the Let's Go Code mats, and we've broken out with students in beginning coding, but it ties into your interpersonal conversations, and it's a great read. If you don't want to purchase it, you can have it read aloud on YouTube, which is a great feature if that's allowed in your school.
Awesome. And it's two birds, one stone, right? A great introduction to coding as well as that interpersonal skill piece.
Definitely.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. We're going to talk about some classroom management. I'm going to go a little bit quicker through some of this stuff just so we have time to answer some questions. So please feel free to start popping any questions you have in there for either of us or ideas that you want to add onto what we're talking about. So in terms of classroom management, some of this is routines and structures that you have in place in your SmartLab. And I just wanted to share some ideas of how to engage students in the SmartLab learning process based on how many days you see them. So our SmartLab learning process is exploring, getting to know the tool that they're going to be using, planning how they're going to achieve the challenge or what they're going to create with their tool, do and reflect. Reflect happens, a lot, but a little heavier in the do part. That's where they're actually working on their project and monitoring their progress towards their goal. And then sharing, of course, we know is important, giving students the opportunity to share what they learned and were able to create. And I want to put a little plug in there for sharing, especially at the upper elementary level, even though we're talking about primary. One, that's just great for engagement and getting students excited about, the potential projects. Shared learning also, a group may have been struggling with something and another group figured it out and shares it, and now they know. But also just being able to synthesize, that entire learning process and give a snippet of what happened, what worked, what didn't. And that can also give you a good read on just some of the skills, some of the problems they may have faced that you might want to address, in depth, either next class period or in the next project. So here are some, ways that you might break down the SmartLab learning process across 2 to 5 days. I know some of you may actually see your kindergarten, first or second grade classes like 5 days out of a week. 1 week out of a month. So if you have that structure, some of the things you can add in are, if you have 2 days where they're doing their project, the second day, maybe have them try another idea that came up with, or iterate on their design and make it better. They can add to it as well, or, add an additional functionality. If you're expanding beyond that, you can incorporate a read aloud. You might have time to do that into some of the other ones as well, but incorporate a read aloud. You might have a more structured exploration, like let's generate some questions we have about this tool and this project. And okay, let's try and answer this one question. Come back and debrief. Let's answer the next question. How can we test it? You guys go do it, come back and debrief. As well as, another thing you can add in is like an academic extension. So if students have been working with Code and Go Colby to build mazes and program him to go through mazes, maybe next what they do is they, create a map of their neighborhood with the tiles, because that's something that they're talking about in their social studies unit. So how could you extend the use of that tool to something that's more academic? And you might kind of give them like a 1-day challenge and just have a few basic steps on a slide or in your own activity card that you want to help them guide them through. Another thing you could do, especially for like your second graders and maybe your first graders towards the end of the year, depending, you guys know your students best. So whenever you think this is appropriate, have them design kind of their own project for 1 class period. So that may be starting with, let's sketch some ideas. Let's write our goal. What's the first thing you're going to do? Okay, everybody has 10 minutes to do it. Let's come back and see how that went. Okay, do your next step. Giving them a little more freedom to come up with their own project ideas and get started working on those. All right, and this is more of an instructional strategy that you might use. If you're familiar with catch and release, typically this happens during either independent or group work time. If you notice confusion, or if you notice like a really great learning or observation, pulling the whole group together real quick to talk about it or to highlight it. But I'm going to talk a little bit about what kind of a planned catch and release might be, where you start by gathering your learners to discuss and determine kind of their first or next step. Maybe at the beginning of a lesson, I talk about, we look at the activity card and say, we're going to start with step 1. Our first step is to put together our bicycle. Okay, talk with your partner about how you're going to do that. All right, next step is to send them off to work for, little chunks of time. Work on that step. You can circulate to help supervise, encourage them to use each other if they get stuck. And then when that time is up, bring them back together to debrief. How did that go? What did we figure out? What did we learn? Did it go as expected? If we made a prediction or a hypothesis, what questions do we have, and give them the opportunity, to help each other in that larger format, and debrief just what happened. And then discuss their next step. Okay, the next step on our activity card is to now change a gear. Talk with your partner, which gear are you going to change? Okay, go do it. Have some time to work. And then you just keep repeating that process. And that can really help break up the time for those younger students who, they just can't sustain, they just don't have the stamina for working for a half hour independently with a partner. So this can be a really great way to break it down and to guide them through the process without giving too explicit of instructions. So you might do this during the explore phase by kind of I talked about a little bit ago, generating some questions or wonderings that they had, going off to try and answer a specific one or two, coming back to report, choosing the next question to try and figure out or test, go back and do it, come back and report. You could use a KWL chart for that. You could also just use an anchor chart with questions on one side and what we figured out on the other, or a slide. You could do that as well. During the plan phase, you might do this for brainstorming ideas. Maybe have them, sketch what they think, brainstorm, come together to share with the group. And then maybe they, you guys kind of do your SMART goal together. Do and reflect. I'd use the structure for the project steps to kind of lead them through. One tip in general, just make sure you have some extensions ready. How can they go above and beyond? I'd recommend having at least 2 or 3, even if they're little simple challenges that will help them push a little bit farther. And, give them that next step up in complexity. For sharing, you might use this for, reviewing the back of the activity card and what they're going to fill out, sending them off to fill out one section, coming back to share as a group, going out to fill out the next section, come back and sharing. So you can break up larger tasks this way, and that could be really, really helpful. All right, so some routines. I'm not going to go too in depth with routines, but I've got some resources to share that can help you build your own. Just a couple of recommendations in general, build this at the beginning of the year, semester, plan on spending a decent amount of time. I was just talking with a facilitator yesterday who was like, I've learned if I really make sure they're trained well at the beginning of the year, the rest of the year and time is so much smoother. And I think that's so true. You got to walk before you can run. And even if you realize oh, I've got some routines I'd like to put into place, do that at the beginning of the new semester, introduce kind of some of your new routines there. I've even seen some schools do a relaunch, welcome to the SmartLab again. And we're going to relearn some of our basics if we really need a restart. Also make sure you've got time for maintenance, practicing some of those again or adjusting. Of course, with routines and expectations in general, it's really important to stay consistent, but if the needs of your learners change, then change those routines. Some of your, depending on your group of students, you might even be able to engage them in the conversation. Something about our organization isn't working well. What ideas do you guys have? How would it be better to organize our kits so that they aren't a mess? Or present them with some ideas and ask them to help vote on what they think might work best. You could also try a couple and, then have them vote if they're unsure of how that might work. There's some ideas on the side for how to, some of the routines you might want to implement. One thing I want to point out, and this was a strategy that I just heard from a facilitator yesterday, and I thought it was really great. With organization of kits, he takes a master box, or maybe at the end he helps a group clean up and uses that one. You could do that as well. Puts it under a document camera and then has students organize their box so it matches the same. You could do the same with kit sheets. or just with a picture. If you just take a quick picture of what it should look like and print it out, or upload it to your computer and put it on a slide, and then have them match that and just do a quick check before they put the lid back on their box. I would make sure to build in enough time so that if they don't do it right the first time, you make sure they fix it and have time to do that before, they've got to leave. Again, that's just that consistency piece. And if they're not meeting expectations, that they have another chance to fix it or some support in fixing it, so that they can meet those general expectations you guys have agreed on. I see a question in the chat about how much time primary students are usually in a SmartLab. I've seen ranges of all sorts of things from 25 minutes to 60 minutes. I've heard from a lot of facilitators that 60 minutes seems like a long time, especially at the beginning of the year. So typically 30 to 45 minutes is a little more common. Lauren, how many minutes do your primary students visit the SmartLab?
30 minutes.
And does that seem like a pretty good length for them?
I wish it were longer. With your objectives and your cleanup procedures, it flies.
Yeah. That's the other, especially with just those basic routines. Sometimes it cuts it down to like 20 minutes and you're booking it, especially if you don't see them a lot. If we've got anybody else listening, feel free to add in the chat how long your class periods are, and how they feel too. If you've got an hour and you're like, actually, that's perfect, and we figured out a routine and a schedule that really makes that work well, please add that in the chat. We'd love to hear how things are going in your SmartLab and what your schedule is like. All right, here is a resource for developing routines. When I was teaching, actually, one of the schools I was in that, we really needed super strong routines in order to be successful. My coach introduced me to a really thorough way of planning routines, and I thought it was extremely helpful. One of the things she specifically asked me to think about was, if part of our routine doesn't go as planned, what do we do? What is the response? What is the redirect? Or what are the resources we provide with students to help scaffold them? So this is just a little planning template to help with that intentional work. And feel free to use it, but I definitely, recommend thinking through some of those things, especially like just coming in, logging in, leaving, cleaning up materials. Those are ones that you want really tight because you're going to make the most of your time if they are. A few recommendations: make sure that every student has a task or a role. If it's like cleaning up and you've got students who maybe in second grade, you've introduced some rotations and some of your students are using software programs, like what are they going to do during that time? Do they get to keep working? Do they help others? Do they have another task? Do they come to the carpet to start a discussion while others clean up and come join? Keep that in mind. Also, work towards an ideal completion time, what you're hoping for, but know that you're not going to get there initially. So it's going to take a little bit longer at first. And you can sometimes make that like a competition, like, oh, we cleaned up in 5 minutes and we met our expectations. Everyone was safe. No one was rushing like crazy. Great job. Let's try to shave 10 seconds off next time. Where could we be more efficient next time? And engage them in that conversation. And then, like I was saying, just reflect with your learners about what's working, what needs to change, and how things are going. All right, keeping an eye on the chat. Someone has 70 minutes. That's way too long. I could definitely imagine with kindergarten, that would be super tough. Someone asked about grade levels per facilitator, and I can tell you from my experience that really ranges. I've seen some labs where they just have one grade band, like kindergarten through second, third through fifth, or sixth through eighth, or ninth through 12th. Some who see K-5, some who see K-6, some who see K-8. And we've got a couple who see K-12, which is a lot. Yep, and Anne, I know K-12 is a lot to do, and that could definitely be hard to scheduling. That would be a really great one if you guys want to connect with someone who sees, a similar grade band of students. Maybe post that on the Facebook facilitator group. See if you can connect with someone in our community who sees the same and maybe faces the same challenges, and be able to connect with them that way. It's a great way to kind of network a little bit, find some members of your community with a similar situation. All right. So a little bit about roles. This can be really helpful, especially with your younger learners in turn taking and sharing and contributing equally. I've got a little video over here on the right. This is from code.org. They talk about pair programming. Like if you're on a computer, what do you do if you're not the person who's controlling the mouse and doing the actual programming? So you can have one act as the driver who's actually using the mouse, and the other person is the navigator. And what that sounds like or looks like is, pointing to where they should go, help reminding them of the next step, maybe documenting if that's appropriate and they're documenting throughout the process, and contributing ideas, and talking through some of that stuff. I've got some other ideas about how you might separate those. You could also have your students discuss with each other, like who's going to do what parts, so that they're contributing equally. Make sure you switch roles frequently. Use a timer. Eventually you might not need to use a timer and they will switch themselves based on when it makes sense. Maybe create a T-chart, a visual of what each person should be doing, especially in some of those, the driver and the navigator type of role, that can be pretty clear. And have some kind of way to designate partners. Is it just A and B? Is it peanut butter and jelly? Is it milk and cookie? Whatever tool you really want to use for designating that. But that way they know, and it's really easy to say, okay, it is now partner B's turn on the computer. Go ahead and switch, and they know who they are and what that means. Lauren, do you have any specific roles in your SmartLab?
I think along with what you were saying of the turn taking, I have found with my timer, I'm not always in a location to reset it. So I've even given a student that responsibility. I take my wireless mouse and set it right beside them. So if I'm circling the room, they can hit that button again. And we have a sound that goes off. I use Classroom Screen. It's free online, and we just have the timer displayed in the front, whether it's the whole class period or if we're breaking practice. I do try and scaffold it though, so the kids aren't as dependent on the timer every single time for my turn, your turn kind of thing.
Awesome. Yeah. Great. That's a great tool. I'll have to check that out. Say that again and I'll add it to our notes.
It's so fun. Classroom Screen.
Okay.
And it, for people that like to monitor the volume, it has a volume control. It has different timer features. It has a text area where I can post my closing task, and it can be a conversation that's posted at the beginning, and the kids see that so they know what they're working with. It's awesome. I love it.
Yeah, I could imagine like that would be really great to put reflection prompts up there of like, what are we going to close our class talking about?
Yes.
So they're thinking about it throughout. And that gives them that like thinking task too of how are we going to wrap this up? That's awesome. All right, it is 4, so we're going to fly through this. Sorry, guys. We can definitely maybe cover some of this stuff in depth with some additional resources or a webinar, but I did want to share some ideas for documentation. With your kindergartners, what might be most accessible in the beginning is just oral sharing, moving into illustrations. If they're familiar with some technology, taking pictures and videos, and then starting to add labels to it, to their pictures, maybe narration to their pictures, to their videos, which is really great in a program like Seesaw. Start introducing some simple sentence requirements as they develop, their writing skills. Move into, kind of sequential writing. First, I did this, then I did that. And then they'll get pretty elaborate with it as they move into second grade and the later part of second grade. So you might start by incorporating this into a morning meeting discussion. This is a great routine really to just be part of your every SmartLab class, even if it's a rapid fire, like share one thing that you learned today and you can use 5 words and make it a phrase. And make sure you plan it out, give them plenty of a minute to kind of think before they get started. They might just be reflecting on the activity cards with drawing what they created and answering those prompts. Some of that might even be orally and then either dictated or drawing pictures and they're just narrating it orally. I've got some plan and reflect pages that you can incorporate through those 2 parts of the process. So I'll show those next. And then I definitely recommend, programs like Flipgrid, Seesaw, Book Creator, Google Slides, tools that allow them to communicate in multiple formats or modalities. I love Seesaw and Flipgrid does this too, because it reads the instructions to them. And then in Seesaw, they have multiple ways that they can respond. Add a picture and illustrate it, or label it, add sentences, add a video, gives everyone an access point. And then Google Slides, you might introduce up towards second grade and do them really basic, like a picture and 1 sentence just to start and get them ready, if you're going to use that tool in third and up. I highly recommend starting with a tool they're familiar with, make it an easy win. They know how to use that tool, start with that, and you can always evolve from there. And if you have time, incorporate it daily. Add reflection, prompts, and sentence stems to help them start as well. Even if you do it orally, that might be a good way to start until they're independently using some of those sentence stems to explain their thinking. I've got a ton of prompts here, as well as sentence stems for each phase of the SmartLab learning process. So as they explore questions that you might ask to get them to reflect and to share their experience, and some sentence stems they can use for responding. And you could have a couple choices, or you could have them focus on one that they're going to use. Maybe you introduce a new one every time, and then they've got a bank of sentence stems that they're familiar with and they know how to use. So these are all going to be accessible on here for you to use, and welcome to incorporate into whatever format is easiest, whether that's a Google slide or you just print these 2 and you've got them ready to go, and jot them on your board as the sentence stems for them to use. Here's the plan page I was talking about. This really just gives them a space to write or draw their ideas. And then there's a sentence stem for writing their SMART goal. So all they have to do is fill in the blanks. It's pretty simple to start. You could also do this in the beginning, like put this up on your dot camera or up on your board, or write it on an anchor chart, read the words, and then in the blank, have them talk with their partner and say what they would fill in that blank with. We will use blank. Okay, everybody tell your partner, what tool are we using today? Code and Go Colby. We're going to create a maze with 10 tiles and 2 turns. Tell your partner, that kind of thing. And then this is a really basic reflection page where it prompts them to reflect by writing or drawing. And then there's a word bank for them to use. So I intentionally left this with no prompts or words. I'd recommend just taking this and putting it into Google Drawing, adding your prompt, adding your words in real quick, and then either printing and giving it to them, or throwing it into Book Creator, or adding it to a Google Slides, whatever format you're using. Customize it, make it your own based on whatever you want to focus on. And if you're focusing on some of those interpersonal skills, it might be one of those prompts and some words they can use to describe how they did with those skills. A few tips. I love this quote, so I want to read it real quick. This is from the Productive Group Workbook. It says, if we don't make the effort to help students to assess their work and determine the next step to take, they will confuse learning with getting it right the first time. And I love this because it really, just points out the fact that we're never at an end state with anything. We always have the opportunity to continue to learn and grow. And so it's important, even at a really basic level, that we start getting students to set goals and to reflect on their learning. And it might just be, here's a question I still have. And as I continue to work, maybe I want to try and figure out that question. Or if I get to come back to this tool, I really want to try and answer this question. Or maybe I just want to do some research on my own, and that's okay too. Or read about it with your parents, whatever that might look like. I've got some protocols there you can use for some reflection time. Think, pair, share. We probably all know, but there's 2 others that you might try. In terms of assessing them, consider using just a quick observation checklist. Since your K-1-2, their documentation is just going to be different. You're going to learn a lot by observing them or listening to them in your discussions. So consider having 1, 2, or 3 criteria you're looking for. So if they're sharing verbally, maybe it's just the communication skills and you want them to have on-topic responses. Use vocabulary from the word bank you give them and give a clear explanation, like it's understandable. And just do a quick check mark or a couple check marks for each student as you listen to them share. And that can just be a really great way to capture some data and maybe know who you want to support with that communication skill in the future, or what scaffolds you might need to add. And then if you're going to self-assess, just incorporate some visuals in there for your students so they understand what each piece means, whether it's emojis or actual pictures or examples. Here is a picture, here's a picture with drawings, here's a picture with sentences, like where am I in my documentation right now? And that can really just be, next time I want to try and add a label to help them with goal setting. So keep that in mind. There's also a ton of resources on the Launchpad. Definitely check them out. We try to put these in the newsletter whenever new ones are, posted, but I know sometimes it gets lost in email, or maybe you missed that newsletter or you got hired later. So I want to emphasize some of those. There's one all about documenting SmartLab learning with primary learners. Some good tips, some good examples of what it might look like in Seesaw or Google Slides. There's also one with sentence frames to help students explain their thinking. So definitely check that one out. SmartLab learning process in primary grades is all about the different phases: explore, plan, do, reflect, and share, and how you might structure that with primary learners. There's activity card templates if you want to create your own activity cards, which are great if you have resources from outside of SmartLab that you want to incorporate and want it structured in a similar way. Those are really great to just pop into Google Drawings. Again, super easy to add pictures on top, add text with a tool that most of you are familiar with. And then kit sheets, that'll be helpful with your organization and giving students a picture of what their kit should look like when they're done with it. So definitely check those out. I will give an opportunity for a couple more questions because I know we've got a few more people on. If you have any more questions you think of, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We'd also love some feedback on this webinar and how we can best support you guys and what you would like out of future webinars. So there's a little URL there. Lauren, did you have any other ideas or things you wanted to add before we wrap up for today?
I think you basically covered it, unless anyone has any questions.
I think we're down to a few. I know we ran over time, but thank you so much, Lauren, for joining us, and for everybody else who joined us today. Definitely keep engaging in that Facebook facilitator group. If you've got any additional primary ideas or resources that you want to share or questions, post them in there. Leverage the community that is here. I know we've got over 200 members in there, so a great resource for you. And if there's anything that you guys need from us, of course, please reach out. All right, thank you all. Have a wonderful afternoon and hopefully a great and restful break next week.
Thanks, Haley.
Thanks.